And we are so excited to bring you a brief three-part series on the history of agriculture in Puerto Rico and how unlocking food production and food sovereignty and decolonization all go hand in hand. Now, we must say that this is going to be a three-part series, and you will hopefully learn something new. But we do want to mention that this is not 100% the story when we encourage you to do your own additional research. And but these are really, we're going over some of the main actors and the main events that happened over the last 125 years. With me, I have our very own Julio, who is a scholar of food sovereignty in agriculture in Puerto Rico. And he will be our expert throughout this three-part series. So you can get up to speed on all things ag. So my first question for you, Julio, how did Puerto Rico become solely dependent on the US to feed its population?
We have to go back to the U.S. invasion, right? Like pre-U.S. invasion, Puerto Rico had a level of subsistence agriculture. It was still importing food stuff, but not at the level that it is now. Not at the 85% of food consumed being imported. No. After the U.S. came in 1898. American interests, they just sought to extract as much profit as possible from their newly acquired colony. They quickly identified that the sugarcane industry was that vehicle. They basically and then they took steps to get to that point, right? So they came in and they quickly devalued the Puerto Rican peso in order to facilitate the infiltration of American capital, right? So by devaluing the local currency, basically all of the landowners and people in Puerto Rico saw their wealth uh, vanish overnight. So at that point, it made it a lot easier for American interests to come in and start acquiring land, buying property, paying for services of local campesinos, jibaros, and so forth.
So once this infrastructure was set up for the colonial capitalists to come in and take over, which they did starting in 1898, 1899, um, who was one of the first people to take over as governor? And I think a lot of people aren't actually aware of Charles Herbert Allen, even though he is a wildly important figure in all this.
Yeah, so like I said, Charles Herbert Allen is a very controversial figure that not a lot of people know about. So from the day that Puerto Rico was invaded by the USA, July 25th, 1898. So from that day up until May 1st of 1900, Puerto Rico was under a military dictatorship, administration, sorry. Basically, they just had military men that were in charge as governors of the archipelago. Now, the Foraker Act that was passed in April of 1900 declared Puerto Rico an unincorporated territory, which will remain an unincorporated territory to this day. And basically, it established a civilian government, ending the military rule officially. From there, the first U.S. appointed colonial civilian governor of Puerto Rico was Charles Herbert Allen. He was a politician from Massachusetts. He ran for governor of Massachusetts, but lost. He was in the House, the Senate, and yeah, he was tapped by DC to become the first civilian governor.
So what were some of Allen's first moves once he was appointed that civilian colonial governor?
Yeah, so Allen went in and he passed the Hollander Act in 1901, which raised taxes on every farmer in Puerto Rico, making it a lot harder for them to maintain their land and work their land. Allen obviously favored U.S. farm syndicates, so he awarded inflated contracts to American businessmen, made it very easy for them to acquire land. He also went to work with the Puerto Rican government, right? He gave the top 626 government salary jobs to his friends from the United States. Uh, Basically, he made sure that he had friends in every single cabinet and in charge of every single administration in Puerto Rico. And When his first report of the government of Puerto Rico, right, because they changed the name to Porto instead of Puerto, when he handed his first report, uh, which he handed it before resigning, just at 17 months afterwards, In the report, he identified Puerto Rico as being a place where the sugar industry could flourish because basically the cost of labor per acre was cheaper than anywhere else in the world, right? So once he found that out, he handed his report and then quit and then ran to Wall Street, where he became the president of the Morgan Trust Company and the Guaranty Trust Company of New York.
What happened to the island once he returned under his new corporate title?
Yeah, so Alan went to work, right? He'd come out with this report where he identified the potential that Puerto Rico had to make people rich if they invested in sugar, the sugar industry. So from this new position, he basically orchestrated the world's largest sugar syndicate at the time. He leveraged his Puerto Rican political appointees, right? Like these people that he had put in positions of power with overinflated salaries. And basically they owed him political favors, which shit that is something that we still see to this day. So these people, he leveraged those appointees to secure land grants, tax breaks, water rights, and favorable tariffs, right? So he was able to acquire all this land, use up all this water, build these railroads, etc., and build the infrastructure that allowed him to build this sugar syndicate. So by 1907, Allen's syndicate on Wall Street was known as the American Sugar Refining Company, which dominated 98% of sugar of all of the U.S. sugar processing capacity. It was also known as the Sugar Trust. Nowadays, we know this corporation as the Domino Sugar Corporation. That's why every time I go to a coffee shop here and I see Domino Sugar, I ask for a different type of sugar. And you should as well.
After Alan has done all this scheming up, like where do we end up here in the 20s and 30s?
Yeah, so exploitation is key there, right? Exploitation of the land, exploitation of the people. The Americans came in and basically bankrupt the archipelago. Like all of the existing elites, landowners, they pretty much lost everything. So you fast forward to 1930, and then Allen and his sugar syndicate, right, Domino Sugar as we know it now, had transformed 45% of Puerto Rico's arable land into sugar plantation, right? Land that should be used to grow food for the local population was being used to grow sugar cane to make a handful of Americans free or rich. And a handful. Allen wasn't the only one. There were other actors as well, but he was the biggest one. Now, the sugarcane industry became so big in Puerto Rico at the time that the output of the industry was 5 times that of Louisiana, compared to being just 1/5 in 1900. So in just a matter of 30 years, Puerto Rico was producing 5 times more sugar than Louisiana was, right? So and these syndicates they controlled everything, right? They control the postal system, they control the railroads, they control San Juan's International Seaport, they control massive tracts of land, used a ton of water, right? And like I mentioned before, land that should have gone towards growing food went to the pockets of a few Americans at the expense of Puerto Ricans, which people forget that Puerto Rico is the poorest Spanish colony in the Caribbean, right? So people were already struggling in Puerto Rico, and these decades of these sugar magnates were absolutely terrible for the local population.
Julio, thank you so much for this education. That concludes part one of our 3-part series on food sovereignty in Puerto Rico. Stay tuned for part two, which we will look on the 1930s and into the 21st century. Thanks, Julio.
My pleasure.